These 9 Australian cities and regions have been quietly engineered into a trap that could wipe hundreds of thousands of dollars off the value of family homes by 2028. We are talking about regions where median prices have already plunged by up to 21% in a single year, where local economies are stalling and where the national property boom you read about in the headlines is actively masking a localized collapse. Stay with me to the very end, because after we expose every single market on this list, I'm going to show you the 3 regions where the smart money is quietly moving right now. There is a very specific lie that the Australian property industry tells you every single year. You open the newspaper or scroll through your feed, and the headline is always the same. Australian property market booms again. National median prices hit new records. The $1 Million Club expands. They talk about Australia as if it is one single housing market moving in one single direction. But that is not how property works. While cities like Perth and Brisbane are currently experiencing explosive double-digit growth, a silent, localized correction is happening right now across specific postcodes in Victoria, New South Wales, and Tasmania. We have been told our whole lives that Australian property doubles every 10 years, that you can buy anywhere, hold for a decade, and retire comfortably. That rule died the moment interest rates normalized. The latest PropTrack data reveals that home prices fell across 139 Australian suburbs over the last 12 months. Some areas saw up to $500,000 wiped off their median value. 14 suburbs suffered double-digit percentage declines. This is not a market taking a breath. This is a structural correction happening in plain sight. If you own property in these 9 areas, or if you are thinking about buying there because it looks cheap, you need to understand exactly why the smart money has already left the building. Let us pull back the curtain on the 9 Australian markets facing a genuine crisis. Number 1. Regional Victoria, specifically the northern corridors. During the pandemic, Regional Victoria was the absolute darling of the Australian property market. City workers fled Melbourne, chasing space, lifestyle, and affordability. Prices in regional towns exploded, sometimes growing 40% in 2 years. But that migration has reversed, and the hangover is devastating. The most recent PropTrack data confirmed that Regional Victoria dominated the worst-performing markets in the entire country, accounting for 40 of the 124 suburbs that recorded price falls. And 8 of the 14 suburbs nationally that recorded double-digit percentage crashes were right here in regional Victoria. The numbers are genuinely alarming. In Kyabram, unit prices crashed by 33%. In Sale and Yarrawonga, property values dropped 25%. In Bairnsdale, prices fell 23%, and Echuca dropped 20%. Why is this happening so fast? Because Victoria is currently experiencing the highest business closure rate in Australia, with over 129,000 businesses shutting down recently. The state government's debt levels are projected to hit $188 billion by 2028, leading to aggressive land tax increases that have actively driven investors completely out of the state. When the investors leave and the city workers return to the office, these regional towns are left with an oversupply of housing and a local economy that cannot support pandemic-era prices. The real estate brochure promises a peaceful, tree-change lifestyle with long-term regional growth potential. But the PropTrack data reveals a market where 1 in 4 property dollars has already evaporated in towns like Sale and Yarrawonga as the pandemic premium collapses entirely. And if you think this is just a regional problem, number 2 proves that the most expensive postcodes in the country are bleeding cash right now. Number 2. Sydney's inner northwest, specifically Oakville. Sydney is supposed to be bulletproof. It is the heavyweight of Australian real estate, but the PropTrack data exposed a massive fault line in Sydney's northwest expansion corridor. Oakville recorded the absolute worst decline for house prices in the entire country in both percentage and dollar terms. Houses there plummeted 21% in 12 months. In dollar terms, that is $398,436 wiped out, nearly $400,000 of equity gone. And 20% of that fall happened in just the most recent quarter, meaning the bleeding is actually accelerating. What is driving this? Oakville and surrounding suburbs were marketed heavily as the new premium acreage and large lot frontier of Sydney. But when interest rates rose and borrowing capacity shrank, the pool of buyers who could afford a $2 million mortgage in the outer suburbs completely evaporated. At the same time, holding costs for these large properties surged. Sellers are now stranded with premium expectations in a market that simply cannot secure the finance to meet them. The prestige marketing promises, exclusive acreage living in Sydney's booming northwest corridor. But the reality of the transaction delivers. A trapped market where sellers have lost $400,000 in equity just to find a buyer who can secure finance. Because the next city shows what happens when the entire state economy hits the brakes. Number 3. Greater Hobart. Hobart was the undisputed growth champion of the late 2000s and 10s. Mainland buyers poured in, buying heritage homes and investment properties sight unseen. Prices doubled, rents skyrocketed, but the music has officially stopped. Hobart's median house price is now forecast by major bank economists to see minimal to no real growth and, in some quarters, actual decline. In the recent quarter ending November, Hobart experienced a 1% drop year on year. And while some forecasters predict a modest 4% recovery by 2026, economists explicitly state that affordability is fundamentally stretched. Prices are still too high relative to local incomes, and population growth has slowed significantly from its pandemic highs. The core issue is that Hobart's economy simply does not generate the local wages required to sustain mainland property prices. Once the interstate investors stopped buying, the local buyers could not carry the weight of the market. Homes that would have had 5 mainland buyers fighting over them in 2021 are now sitting on the market for 90 days with regular price reductions. The picturesque postcard promises a booming island capital with endless investment potential and heritage charm. But the local wage reality dictates a market where prices have decoupled so violently from local incomes that the only direction left to adjust is backwards. And if you thought buying a luxury apartment in the best location in Australia was a safe bet, number 4 is going to absolutely terrify you. Number 4. Sydney's harbour and historic unit markets, specifically Millers Point. Millers Point sits in the shadow of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It is some of the most historically significant and geographically desirable real estate on the Australian continent. You would assume it is the safest place to park $1 million in the country. You would be wrong. According to PropTrack, Millers Point had the absolute worst result of all suburbs in the entire country for units. The unit median plunged by an astonishing 55%. That is a loss of $666,353 from the median price in just 12 months. How does a premium Sydney harbour market lose half its value? It comes down to a combination of high holding costs, strata complexities in historic and premium buildings, and a broader shift in buyer preference away from high-density living when borrowing costs are at their peak. Investors are running from high strata fees, and owner-occupiers are finding better value further out. Darling Point apartments dropped 12%. Kirribilli fell 11%, wiping out $145,000. The Harbour View promises blue-chip Sydney real estate that will protect your wealth forever. But the PropTrack data proves even the best views in Australia cannot protect a unit market from a 55% collapse when holding costs and buyer sentiment shift. because the next area proves that even beachside holiday towns are no longer safe. Number 5. Regional Victoria's coastal markets. If the regional northern corridors are crashing because of business closures, the coastal markets are crashing because of something entirely different. The Victorian government's aggressive new land tax policies and strict regulations on short-term rentals. Apollo Bay saw property values drop 8.5%, Lakes Entrance fell 12%. Venus Bay and Paynesville both recorded significant single-digit negative territory falls. These were the ultimate holiday home markets. But when the Victorian government drastically lowered the tax-free threshold for land tax, thousands of holiday homeowners suddenly received bills for thousands of dollars they had never had to pay before. Simultaneously, local councils began cracking down on the profitability of short-term rental properties. The result? A mass exodus of investors and second homeowners trying to sell their properties at the exact same time. When supply floods a small coastal market and the investor demand has been legislated out of existence, prices do not just soften, they snap. The sea change dream promises a profitable coastal investment you can enjoy with the family in summer, but the Victorian tax reality enforces a flooded market of desperate sellers trying to escape holding costs that have destroyed the investment case entirely. And if you think the top end of town in Melbourne is immune, number 6 proves that prestige does not equal protection. Number 6. Melbourne's premium inner ring. Melbourne is currently the weakest performing mainland capital city market in Australia. In the first quarter of 2026, while Perth surged 7.3%, Melbourne prices fell 0.9%. A NZ Bank explicitly forecast that Melbourne prices will fall a further 1.7% in 2026. And the pain is heavily concentrated at the top end. Toorak, the most prestigious suburb in the state, recently saw its median house price slump by $597,600. That is a 14.4% drop to $4.15 million. 14 suburbs across Greater Melbourne saw their median prices fall over the last year. Why is the premium market bleeding? Because at that price point, buyers are highly sensitive to economic confidence and business conditions. With Victoria's debt burden rising, massive infrastructure projects stalling, and high-income earners feeling the squeeze of interest rates, the pool of buyers with $4 million to spend has shrunk dramatically. The prestige postcode promises the safest, most resilient blue-chip dirt in Victoria, but the nearly $600,000 price drop in Toorak proves when economic confidence leaves a state, it takes the premium property market with it first, because the next city shows exactly what happens to volatile markets when momentum cools down. Number 7. Darwin. Darwin has always been the Wild West of Australian property. It booms aggressively when infrastructure or resources projects are announced, and it can hollow out just as fast when they finish. While Darwin recently experienced a strong pandemic-era boom, the momentum has started to settle from its late 2025 peak. The fundamental issue with Darwin is its historic boom-and-bust transients. A significant portion of the population is there for a contract, a military posting, or a specific project. When the national economy tightens and interest rates remain high, conservative investors look for markets with deep, diversified economic bases. Darwin relies heavily on government spending and resources. The property market there has always been exposed to massive, rapid swings without a huge underlying permanent population growth to stabilize it long-term. The high-yield marketing promises exceptional rental returns in Australia's Northern Gateway. But the transient population reality delivers a volatile market where historic boom and bust cycles make long-term capital growth deeply unpredictable compared to diversified southern cities. And if you think the affluent Northshore of Sydney is safe, number 8 is going to make you check your property appraisal again. Number 8. Sydney's Northshore and Harbour enclaves. We already talked about the unit crash in Millers Point, but the disease has spread to the houses on the North Shore as well. Normanhurst saw its median price fall by 19%. Thornley dropped 11%. And in Mossman, one of the most famous prestige suburbs in the country, house prices recorded a sharp correction of 8.6% in a single quarter. Why is the North Shore cracking? Because Mossman sits squarely in what property analysts call the mortgage ceiling bracket. With a median house price approaching $6 million, even high-income professionals, lawyers, surgeons, investment bankers are hitting their absolute borrowing limits under current interest rates. The serviceability buffers required by the banks mean that even the top 1% of income earners cannot borrow enough to keep pushing these prices higher. When the buyers hit the ceiling, the prices have to come down to meet them. The leafy green suburb promises generational wealth creation in Sydney's most stable family enclaves, but the borrowing capacity reality enforces a market that has simply run out of buyers who can secure the finance required to sustain current prices. And the final market on this list is perhaps the most dangerous, because it is the one that looks the most tempting to first home buyers right now. Number 9. Melbourne's high-density unit corridors. We have covered regional towns and prestige suburbs, but the quietest and most persistent value destruction in Australia is happening in the high-density apartment corridors of Melbourne. Melbourne has a significantly higher proportion of apartments compared to Brisbane and Adelaide, and the pipeline of new supply has consistently outpaced the genuine owner-occupier demand for these specific types of properties. A large supply of high-density housing has kept unit prices artificially depressed for years. And now, with investors fleeing Victoria due to the land tax changes, the situation is becoming critical. If you buy a high-density, off-the-plan apartment in Docklands, South Bank, or the central business district fringes right now, you are buying into a market with massive oversupply, rising strata costs, and an actively hostile tax environment for the investors who would normally buy it from you when you want to sell. Independent analysts warn that this specific segment of the Melbourne market is facing years of stagnation and, in real inflation-adjusted terms, significant value loss. The glossy off-the-plan brochure promises affordable inner-city luxury with strong rental guarantees, but the oversupply and tax reality delivers. An asset that will struggle to maintain its purchase price, let alone generate capital growth, in a state actively punishing property investors. Now step back and look at the pattern connecting every single one of these 9 markets. They are not failing because of bad luck. They are failing because the structural math no longer works. In regional Victoria, the pandemic premium has evaporated and the land tax has driven investors out. In Sydney's premium suburbs, buyers have hit the absolute ceiling of their borrowing capacity. In Hobart and Darwin, local wages cannot support the prices, or transients creates massive volatility. And in Melbourne's unit market, chronic oversupply has destroyed the investment case completely. The media tells you the Australian property market is booming because the national average is pulled up by Perth and Brisbane. But the national average does not pay your mortgage. Your specific suburb does. And if you are holding property in a market where the fundamental drivers of growth have collapsed, you are standing on a trapdoor. But you do not have to be the one left holding the bag. Now let us talk about where the smart money is actually moving in Australia right now. If you want to protect your capital and actually see growth over the next 5 years, the data points overwhelmingly to 3 specific types of markets. Option 1, Perth and Brisbane's middle ring suburbs. While Melbourne and Sydney stagnate, Perth and Brisbane are currently experiencing an explosive structural re-rating of their property values. Perth surged 7.3% in a single quarter, and Brisbane is up 19% annually. Why? Because their economies are strong, their population growth is massive, And most importantly, their property prices are still fundamentally affordable relative to local incomes compared to Sydney and Melbourne. The middle ring suburbs of these cities, offering freestanding houses on decent blocks of land, are where the absolute safest and strongest growth is forecast for the next 3 years. Option 2, Adelaide's consistent, quiet boom. Adelaide has historically been ignored by East Coast investors, but it has quietly become one of the most resilient and consistently performing markets in the country. Prices rose 11.4% annually, driven by severe housing shortages and a very stable local economy. It does not experience the wild booms and busts of Darwin or Regional Victoria. It just steadily, relentlessly grinds upwards. For a conservative investor, Adelaide's middle ring is currently presenting as one of the safest bets in the nation. Option 3, Melbourne's established middle ring houses. While Melbourne's premium market and high-density units are bleeding, the smart money is looking at Melbourne's established middle ring suburbs for freestanding houses. Suburbs like Reservoir, Lalore, and Oakleigh are being aggressively targeted by borderless investors who recognize that Melbourne is currently offering a temporary value gap. With Melbourne's median house price significantly lower than Sydney's, experts point out there is massive room for growth once the state economy stabilizes and interest rates drop. If you are buying in Victoria, this is the only segment of the market the data supports right now. The Australian property market is no longer a rising tide that lifts all boats. It is a fractured, highly localized landscape where buying the wrong suburb in the wrong state can wipe out a decade of your savings in 12 months. The headlines will keep telling you everything is fine. The real estate agents will keep telling you it is a great time to buy. But the prop track data, the banking economists, and the business closure rates are screaming a very different reality. Do not buy the headline, buy the math. If this video opened your eyes to what is genuinely happening in the Australian property market right now, tap the like button so we can put this information in front of every Australian buyer before they make a mistake they cannot afford. If you want to stay one step ahead of the property industry's spin, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because the market is shifting fast and we are going to keep tracking exactly where the money is going. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you own property in any of the 9 markets we talked about today? Are you seeing prices drop and properties sit on the market longer in your local area? Tell me your story below, because your local knowledge helps everyone else see the truth behind the headlines.